You're listening to the Support Ed Learning Podcast, where we challenge the status quo of education and reimagine what learning should be. I'm Dr. Joe Sebestyen, and in every episode we dive into critical thinking, Bloom's taxonomy, educational innovation, and how AI is shaping the future of learning. Whether you're a teacher, parent, policymaker, or lifelong learner, you're in the right place to rethink, reshape, and revive education. Welcome back to the Supported Learning Podcast. We have an exciting guest to bring to you today. Today's guest is someone who has helped more students learn math than almost anyone on the internet. Brian McLogan is the founder of Free Math Videos, one of the largest math education platforms in the world. With over 1.6 million subscribers and more than 13,000 lessons covering everything from algebra to calculus. What makes Brian's work especially powerful is that his teaching comes from deep empathy. He openly shares that he struggled with math as a student himself, and that experience shaped his entire philosophy around stress-free learning and helping students who feel like they're just not math people. Brian spent 14 years teaching the classroom before transitioning full-time to online education, scaling what feels like to be one of the one-on-one help to a global audience. Brian, welcome to the podcast. I'm really excited to talk about your journey and what students need to succeed in math.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. I'm very excited to talk about some math.
Yeah, I love that you're a growth mindset kind of person because I think I shared this story on a call the other day about, because a lot of kids, a lot of parents pressure kids into like trying to figure out their path early on, like what is their career path and things like that. And I distinctly remember where I was in my aunt's house because I used to want to be an architect, probably in middle school. I loved playing with Lincoln logs and Legos. And I had one of friends of my aunt's was in the house just telling me like, oh, there's a ton of math in being an architect. It's not just about drawing things. And that like stopped me dead on my tracks because I was like, I'm not a math person. So that really, really kind of resonates with me. So before we kind of dive into strategies, I want to start with like your story, just kind of like the background and how, you struggled as a math student and why you felt struggled as a math student and you're a math teacher. So how does bridge that gap?
Yes. Yeah, it's kind of a little oxymoron, I guess, right? So I was that student that just, really hit me right around 7th grade. I remember we did that testing if you're going to go in like the honors track. And I remember taking that test and my mom's like, oh, you tested for like the honors track. She's like, but you're not going into it. Okay.
Yeah.
Sure, mom, whatever. I guess, she was a math teacher. So I was just like, fine with me. Right. And then I remember even 7th grade math. It was my first time where I could look at the sheet of paper and I'm like, I don't know, what to do. Right. And that started that trajectory of me struggling with math, ups and downs through high school. But it carried through all the way through my senior year where, I was just getting by. And math really wasn't anything that I was really focused on. I didn't really decide I wanted to be a math teacher until my senior year, but that was really because I wanted to be a teacher. I was really into sports. I enjoyed coaching. I enjoyed helping people. And so I thought being a teacher would be a natural fit for me. And math was really just that one subject that I kind of liked, even though I wasn't good at it. But I understand, growing up or doing the math, like what it felt like just to be stressed out, not understanding how to do the work, getting poor grades, making simple mistakes, and just kind of wondering what do I need to do to get better at this.
I guess, what was the moment that math like finally clicked for you?
So, there was never a moment that math clicked, but I think it really wasn't until I got into college. And because then I had a different mindset, right? Going through high school, I just needed good enough grades to get into college, right? My parents were very much, you are going to college. So I had to do whatever I needed to do to get good enough grades. And so I passed that. But then once I decided I wanted to be a math teacher, with my lovely D in pre-calculus my senior year, I realized I'm like, all right, I need to actually understand what I am doing, right? And I remember there was a couple moments. I remember taking college algebra freshman year, and it was probably my first aha where I was like, oh, wow, this is actually the exact same thing, just over and over, just different functions. It was like the first time I really started to recognize patterns in mathematics. Right. And then I remember taking calculus, and there's this one time where it finally something just triggered something that I remember learning in like high school or college. And I was like, oh my God, I finally see the whole purpose of all the stuff I was doing in high school. And it was like one of those moments where I was like, I just wanted to like tell everybody, it's like, I now get it. I now see and understand how math is so ingrained in everything that we do in our life. And then all the stuff that we were learning, in those high school years was really just that foundational stuff, but once you get into high school, into the upper level math, that's a lot of really that good stuff.
So what did, obviously became a teacher and you probably had some views change on learning, but what did those 14 years in the classroom teach you about how students actually learn, specifically learn math?
So, I mean, not only did my views change, but the way that I taught changed a lot. And I think one thing that I always prided myself on being a teacher was, every year I wanted to get better. I never recycled my old lesson plans. I always wanted to think about how can I teach, this topic, this chapter in a better way to get kids more engaged. And that was really, my kind of thought process. And I would evolve, and I had different grading policies. I did all the things that your district, wants you to include or not include. Like I was always trying things and incorporating and taking things away. But I think one thing that was kind of like the constant through my teaching years that I'd probably say as far as on students learning was there has to be some kind of the break or a struggle or that kind of like that challenge. Because I've had students that always did good in my class, and I had the students that really, really struggled. But the ones that I feel like got the most out of my class and really got the most out of actually like retaining the information is the ones that had to kind of overcome something. They had that struggle. And I think that's one of the thing that plays into really, getting to learning is kind of embracing that. I mean, that's part of that growth, not only mindset, but really the growth of being able to learn this new information.
Well, it's funny you say that because I think going back to that question before last about like the clicking of it in high school, because as an assistant principal, I see it a lot. Kids who are apathetic to school doesn't really work for them anymore. And a lot of those kids might be in technical education programs or heading towards the trades. And so then they're seeing really like no value in real world math. And boy, do you need it, because I had to build a set of deck steps to connect my deck to my patio, second floor walkout basement. And I really wish I remembered geometry rise over run, because figuring out those stairs without a basic understanding of math was a freaking nightmare. So I guess, you saw this as an education, as a teacher. And I guess what made you start doing this online?
So it was really being that student that would take notes in class. And I have this vivid in my memory, taking notes in class, feeling like I can do my homework. So, I'd always have sports and so I'm going to go to sports and I'll do my homework late at night, do everything else I need to do. I'll do that last because I understood today's lesson. And then I remember I'd get out my math homework, get started, and I couldn't do one problem. Go back, look through my notes, took great notes, paid attention in class, did not remember one thing. And even the notes made absolute no sense to me. And I just remember that being so mad and frustrated because, at least for my brain, if I was really going to do homework, I needed to do it kind of immediately, but also I wouldn't retain information very well. Right. So I kind of needed a little bit, more of seeing things and a little bit more practice than probably your average student. So when, really the opportunity came for me to be able to record myself. I mean, just my natural thing was, this is what I would want as a student. If my teacher is teaching and they're explaining how to do a problem, that ability to be able to go home and be able to watch those and review our lesson is exactly what I would want. And so I started doing that for, when students would ask questions, on the previous homework, I would just record those. And then it just kind of turned into an obsession where I was just recording the definition of this, or, I just was anything that was coming out of my mouth, I wanted to kind of record, not for every single second in the classroom, but it was always little snippets, from there. I always try to keep those videos nice and short because obviously I didn't want to interrupt a classroom experience.
Now, did that start, were those just private videos for your kids and then expand on YouTube, or did you always want to like expand to a bigger audience?
No, I mean, they were always to a global audience, but
Okay.
when I started on YouTube, there was no thumbnails. There was no partner program. I was recording anywhere from 20 to 40 videos a day.
Wow.
And so, I mean, there was sometimes I didn't even have time to write titles. So I would just upload, the video, the natural like coding of the video. Like I want to get this content out there. Because really at that time, there wasn't a built out infrastructure, and even Google search wasn't as, zeroed in as it was, a couple of years, later.
Right.
So I was just anything I could talk about in math and make a video, I want to put it on YouTube. And that was just kind of my mindset, from on there. And then thumbnails came on later, and then I had to adjust, for
Right.
all that. But students were never in my video. So I was always just me,
Yeah, no, I meant in terms of like, you've heard of like the flipped classroom, right? So there's, especially during COVID, it became more popular, but it existed before COVID. You'd record a lesson, kind of go into like the granular, like the who, what, when, where, why, or who, what, when, where, and you really focus deeper on the why and the how in class. I didn't know if you already had the pattern of recording videos for your class before the whole YouTube thing, but it sounds like that was separate.
I did. And I did before, at least I can remember learning about the flipped classroom. I'm sure it might have been thought about, before I was doing videos, but I even tried it and I never incorporated it fully into my classroom.
Okay.
I really just wanted to create my videos as, again, for me as a student, like short and to the point. I didn't want my students or even myself, like watching a 20 or 30 minute, like lecture. I don't know. I don't have the time for this right now. It's like, it was really just, let me explain something in a short to the point format to understand a particular issue or problem. And I'll combat that with multiple different examples, right? So multiple, problems 2 to 3 minutes long. So therefore it's kind of an a la carte. You can watch as much as you want, or maybe one video will help you.
What did you used to coach?
I coached high school wrestling where I taught. And then I also coached high school baseball when I was in college.
Okay. Very, very cool. Do you think you have the heart of the coach first or the heart of the teacher first in terms of like how you kind of fell in love with explaining those things to kids?
It's so funny because even growing up, I was a volunteer coach for my wrestling program. I loved, kind of giving back to the younger kids whenever they were doing like clinics, and stuff like that.
Sure.
But math, it's like I said, math was kind of like second fiddle. I didn't really enjoy it as much, but it's funny. Once I got into the classroom, I enjoyed my time as coaching with wrestling, but I only did it for 3 years because I also kind of quickly realized this isn't really where my passion is at anymore, So I really feel like, but math, it took 14 years for me to really kind of get that feeling of now is the time to step away. Right.
Yeah.
So I really kind of leaned into that math teaching kind of elements and having students see growth through that compared to athletics.
I asked because you mentioned in the intro how you teach from a set of empathy principles and wanting to help kids, and that I was a football coach too, and I felt I was a coach before I was a teacher. I was like kind of like you. I volunteered coach before I actually taught in the classroom, and it was just the relationships you build with those players sometimes have stereotypical, like they're not always the gifted academics, right? Or they might be, but you have that relationship and right. you're able, I think it's in there where it's kind of like a lost art of building those relationships with kids to be able to reach them on a personal level so they're open to learning, right? Because ultimately that is kind of where teaching meets the rubber meets the road from that standpoint. I just didn't know if you had similar experiences in that aspect.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, again, going back to that, what I mentioned, like with that learning and like the struggle and, kind of having those, overcoming those, you got to have that relationship, right? For students to be open to the learning and then for you to guide them. And, the greatest feedback I have from my, teaching career is when students were struggling the beginning of the year, they want to get out of my class. We go through multiple parent conferences and I'm like, I believe in you. I know you can handle in this class, but here's the stuff you need to do. And you can see them actively putting in the work and you see their grade go from a D to an F. And it's almost just like, it's such an amazing feeling, because you're able to reach them. You get that rapport. They're open to it. They put in that work.
Right.
And that, that's just one of the greatest blessings I had as a teacher.
So AI has kind of put a ruffle in everyone in high school these days, as I've seen in classroom. I remember the day ChatGPT was a thing and kids were using it to cheat on their writing papers. But AI is going to disrupt everything globally. But how, in your experience, how are AI tools changing the way we learn math and how kids learn math right now?
I'd like to think I was a little ahead of the curve, or at least I would say I was kind of prepared for ChatGPT. Because as I evolved in my teaching, I did actually do a little bit of the flipped classroom, actually, you were alluding to, when I actually remember now better, but I never required it. So I did build out my courses and I gave them to my students. It's a full video course, but it would include every single homework assignment. The answers were provided, worked out solutions with a video from me that they could have after every test and quiz. I had a video with the answers. And so students were really, focusing on the homework with the ChatGPT, right? Going back to when I was in high school, I didn't understand my homework. I just had to either find somebody that knew it, call them on the phone, or show up the next day. And, if math was after lunch, I try to meet them at lunch, and try to get some help with some answers or something like that, right? And I never thought that was the most efficient, right? Technology can be there for us that we don't have to go through those struggles. And so that's why I provided my students the answers. I was like, hey, here's the answers. But, here's the thing. If you just want to copy my answers and get 100% for your homework, congrats to you, because you're going to still have to take that test. And I am still going to know if you did your homework, and how you did on this test. And I think ChatGPT, is the exact same thing. It's an amazing tool for students to be able to use and learn to understand how to do particular problems. So therefore, there is an aspect, I think, on the work that I do on YouTube, which is kind of that relationship building, which is very similar to like teachers inside the classroom. But as far as just getting that direct answer or trying to find the direct way to do something, AI is amazing at that. But I think the important thing that you alluded to is it's a tool. You have to be able to understand it as a tool. And if you are going to just rely on it, it's eventually going to come back and hurt you.
So how should students use it without becoming dependent?
I think a couple of things that I, told my students, and one thing I used to give advice for my students before we even had AI, I was like, if you want to prepare and study for, this test, and let's say you have a couple questions that you're working through, you don't know how to go through them. Always make sure you have, let's say you have a worked out answer or something. Go ahead and try to do the problem on your own. You already know it's worked. Like you already have the full written out solution, but cover that up and actually try to do the worked out solution. And once you get stuck, pull back the piece of paper, see the correct way to do it, put it, and then cover back up and then try to finish it. Maybe you can do it. Maybe you make like one or two mistakes your first time through, but go through that process until you can do your problem on your own. I feel the exact same thing with ChatGPT. It's just now the answer and knowledge is on in AI, then it's already worked out in front of you. And you also get expansive list of all sorts of problems, right? This was me working on, if a teacher gave you a study guide, right? You have 10 worked out examples that you can review or practice. Now AI, you can basically give it almost any question you want. It'll provide you that worked out solution, but still the same thing. You can review where you got stuck, but you still need to make sure you can go through the work and do it on your own. Mm-hmm. So if that's covering up your computer screen or asking it to give you a different example. And I think the other thing that's important, that's helpful too, is, when you're studying and preparing, if you're just going off of a teacher study guide or, what's been, provided, a lot of time that's not enough. I started seeing my most success in math once I started going above and beyond. I wasn't just doing the homework and, the test reviews. I was looking for those challenging problems. Again, back in my day, age myself, the only way to find those was in the back of the book, right? And I'm finding problems that the instructor didn't even give, but I was forcing myself to struggle and work through those types of problems. Well, now with AI, you can you can ask for certain problems that are going to challenge you, and you can get some immediate feedback on there. So I think it's a great, amazing tool, but if you're just going to rely on it and you're never going to build those muscles yourself, then it's not going to be a much gain for you.
So why do so many kids believe they're not math people?
Well, I think part of it is the way we teach it.
Interesting.
And what I mean by the way we teach it is, we are expected to have a certain level of mastery at a given time. And I'm just not convinced that people are, I think convinced that the best way to measure people's aptitude in their mathematics is, by June 5th, everybody needs to know these set of standards. I think we can get around, with it, obviously putting in some more work and having some extension. But I feel like for people to understand math, sometimes we need a little bit more time. We need a little bit more work. Like you said, right? I wanted to become a math teacher, and I remember going to visit my counselor in college, and he's like, "You want to be a math major?" I'm like, "Yes." He's like, "Well, our math majors are already taking, Calc 2. And he's like, "You're going to be in college algebra." And I'm like, "Well, sorry, but here I am." Right. And
Right.
I did have to take an extra semester. I did have to double up some years with math. But the reality was my mom was absolutely correct. I was not mentally mature enough, not mentally, I would mathematically mature to really comprehend and understand the mathematics. And let's just say I pushed myself through calculus and I worked really hard. I was not ready to understand calculus even as a senior. I wasn't ready to understand calculus even as a freshman, right? I took calculus my sophomore year of college, but I was able to gain success because I had built up that time. And I feel there's so many students that, and when I talk about the failing of teaching, there's so many students that have gotten failure in mathematics. They didn't understand something, but maybe they got by with an A, which was me, right? I think I got an A or a B in my sophomore year in high school, but I still didn't truly understand really what I was doing, right? But I was able to get by, because if you still don't understand something, but you know enough to get a better grade, then you just move on to the next grade. So I really do believe having some, mastery, set kind of grading and looking into changing that timeline, which doesn't match a traditional schooling, is something that would better a lot of people. And then I also think that being struggling in math is it's acceptable. Right. I mean, you're not good at math. Well, that's the very common thing that, parents, I wasn't good at math, so it's okay. And yeah, there's not one thing that gives me tingles down my spine, like hearing that, and people accept it's okay not to be good at math.
Right. And it's kind of like there's this idea we just accept it and move on with our lives, that we'll never need math after school again, right? Like it's just whatever. Okay, not good at math. It's cool.
Right.
Be financially illiterate for the rest of their life unless they're mathematically illiterate.
But here's the thing though, just to really add on to it, like I'm also not somebody that puts math at this apex of like, you have to be the best at math to have success in life.
Yeah.
So I am very, welcoming on that. Like math is not the end all be all, but I also feel like a lot of people use that excuse to avoid the true struggle that they need and the accountability that they need to go through to actually be good at math.
Do you think it's more of a line between like actually acknowledging that we're not good at critical thinking? Because, the trend in education, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, maybe longer, was STEM, 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 right? Like forget the humanities, it's all STEM. And then it became like STEAM. No, you need some arts, but like I don't know. Do you know who Fareed Zakari is? He's on CNN. He does like
No.
so he wrote a book like in defense of liberal education, small L, and he just talked about this big push for the need for STEM is we're losing sense of what makes us human, of humanities, and like you don't want a bunch of scientists working on things that could potentially destroy the world without forgetting what makes us human. Like it's all like Renaissance principles.
Mhm.
But you approach math from a certain level of empathy. So I just wonder, is that something we're getting lost in that? Because I hear these trends and I hear like, oh, because I see it from the opposite, where it's like, oh, they're not good at history. They're more of a STEM kid. They're more of a math and science kid. But then when it boils down to it, the reason they're struggling in history, especially AP history, is they can't think through the problem. And it's like I think there's a disconnect between this memorization and this just do it for the grade rather than what is actually the process of learning. So I guess can you expand on where that difference is in terms of, how do you teach thinking and not memorization?
It's difficult, I think, in the environment that we are and the pressure that I think a lot of students are under on grades, colleges, AP assessments that are coming up, scholarships. It's very difficult for students and I believe parents too to like understand of like just try your best and like grades they'll come, but like we want you to focus. It's I think that the because if you look at like that truer kind of like learning and really not as much trying to get as much information as possible before you take that assessment and get that grade, so therefore then you can get the 5 or you get the scholarship money and then you can go to that university. It's a balance, and I think it's a tough balance. If I was to kind of step back on your question, I would say we need more students taking calculus because we've gotten away from that. It's kind of been like, only some students need to take calculus. Let's do more stats.
Mm.
I say we need more students that need to take calculus and more students that need to be in the arts as well. I don't feel as it should be. I agree. We shouldn't have just all these, scientists and stuff like that. But I also don't agree like we should just limit the number of students going into, these STEM fields. Like I feel like we need to be able to raise the standards. And I feel that it's going to be only more beneficial the more higher up students go in their mathematical journey, not as a force that, kind of like we kind of had like in a traditional setting.
Right.
But I think the more students that we have that are reaching that, the calculus, kind of series and actually understanding what they're doing, not just memorizing and getting grades to move to the next level, as well as the students that are actually engaging in school, right? We have so many students that I feel like have such a bad taste in their mouth because all they're worried about is doing their grades in this class and then studying and that's where those, a lot of those humanity classes, come in. That balances out the student. But if all you're doing is just focusing on these tests and these studyings, like, what is this all for? I mean, my favorite class in high school was band because that was my break from everything that we were doing in school. Like I loved band and I took it all 4 years because that was the best thing I had. And like, and for some students it could be band, for some students it could, be another course that they just really kind of grab onto that doesn't have the mental and time demands as some of our, other courses will take in.
What do you think is the biggest myth around learning math that schools reinforce?
I mean, I guess I'd probably just circle into that, one that if students get I'm not sure if it's, really a myth, but I think it's something they take into that, the grade, and this is even it's schools, but I'd also take it into teachers as well as not teachers, parents, and well as students, is that your grade matches your understanding or your ability, right? Because so many people take that grade exactly as a truth statement of you got an A,
100%.
you know exactly what you're doing. You are prepared for that next course. Or, hey, you got a D or a C. You do not know what you're doing. You are not prepared. So I don't think, so much as a myth, but it's this
Misalignment
connection
maybe.
we have to the simplicity of grading that tells a whole story about a student, which is, I think, very, very completely inaccurate.
I love that. Yeah.
Levels.
I mean, we're literally about to do a webinar later on tonight. We run it almost monthly about why straight A students get 2s and 3s on their AP exams, because the grade's not a reflection of what you know. It's so backwards, but you mentioned something earlier, like a lot of elementary schools, I don't know, I'm not sure if you keep up with it, but like my kids from K to 3, it's all standard based report carding, like if they mastered the skill or not. And then we move away from it to letter grades in third and fourth grade. But I wonder if that needs to be like a holistic intervention in school, because you're right. We're grade chasing because there's such pressure on getting into top schools, but the grade is not actually a representation of what we know, what we've mastered. And it should maybe be tied to some kind of standardized benchmarking, which would give a better indication of learning.
Right. I agree. I think it's hard. I think it's, and I even played around with that in my class, doing some more standard based grading and kind of just, removing a little bit of more of the traditional kind of grading, pieces to it. I think there's some positive elements, with it. I think there's also just some hard things to implement it, as long as we still have these tough demands and competition in the higher grades, getting, going into college and everything like that. Like, grading is a simplistic way of measurement. Right. And it's, but I always I tried my best to have my students not take their grades, to their hearts. But it was tough, because, an A just is going to resonate with,
what do you
feels like it just tells your whole story in your life. Right. And if you get an F, it's like, I'm not going home, Mr. McLogan. If you're going to give me a B, I'm like, I'm giving you a B. Right. And, it's like, that's what we had. And, there's always opportunities to improve, your grade and stuff, but I hate the simplicity of it. But as far as where we are still currently at, I think in our educational, process, as far as in colleges, I think it'd be hard pressed to be making a change across the board that would, work.
What do you think about this? So our first class of our doctorate program, they had an A or redo policy, or A or repeat policy. Basically, whatever you submitted, because they were all writing, you either got an A on it or you had to redo it. It wasn't good. Like, so you were getting an A, but you just don't know how many times you were like. Now, I don't know if it was structured correctly in that format to get the iteration process of like really making something well, but just what do you think of that philosophy of like everyone eventually gets an A? It just might take you a while. Just keep redoing it until you actually mastered the concept.
I mean, I had something similar to that. I would allow students to do test corrections. But for them to be able to do like their test corrections, I did have a limit of it. I mean, you just couldn't show up, bomb my test, and then go and get an A. Like I did experiment with that, but doing it a year, you kind of realize the psychology of high school students. You're like, all right, got to make some adjustments. But so what I did adjust with was, you were allowed to do retakes. I would allow, or test corrections, but I would give you opportunities, anything to improve upon your grade. But there would be, partial credit, but at least a letter grade or even 2. But there was always extra work that was attached to it, kind of as you mentioned, to like that redoing it, because I didn't want a kid that got an A that put in the hours of studying to kind of feel like they got shorted because this kid just got to do test corrections and now they have an A. Right. I wanted there to be quote unquote pain. I wanted that student to understand, I don't want to have to do this again, but thankfully Mr. McLogan's given me the opportunity to do this. Right. Because if you didn't have that, which I did like the year before, students were just retaking every test, right? That's all they're doing. Every test, they're like, I just want to see what type of problem, how you're going to ask the questions. And then I do the retake. And of course, I created that monster. So then I'm grading all these extra tests. And I'm like, no, I don't want you to do retakes. And I don't want you to want to do retakes. So, but I'm still going to provide that opportunity. Right.
Right.
But I think AI can also lessen that, a little bit, at least on the teacher end.
Sure.
But still, that kind of comes into that pain and that struggle process that, I want students to kind of, I want them to do it, right? I don't want them not to act. And that was the actual other thing. I want you to do those retakes. I want you to look at your test, what you got wrong, figure those problems out, and then redo them. I don't want you to throw it in the trash can, walk away, and then wait for chapter 7 and see how that's going to be. Right. So it was one of those things I want to encourage the students to do it, but also not one that, it's kind of like a freebie.
What changes when students stop fearing mistakes, especially in math?
When students stop fearing mistakes, I think they allow a little bit more of their natural curiosity to really kind of to come out. One of the things that I did get feedback from my videos from my students was, I provided them as I mentioned, all the answers. And, were there students that would just copy my answers and then try to do the best on the test and hope for the retakes? They were, but yeah, those students were still D and F, students. But one of the things I remember a student came to me and said, Mr. McLogan, it was like at the end of the year, I have like little surveys and she struggled, through my class. But she said, Mr. McLogan, thank you so much for, providing all these answers, for me, because it helped me, be able to not worry so much about the mistakes or see the mistakes, that I was making, because I could immediately correct them. And you could kind of see she had a different tone, because she told me like in, previous, or just knew from like talking to students, previous teachers,
Mm-hmm.
like when students fear that kind of mistake, and especially if they fear of getting the problem wrong, that's when the hands come down. That's when a lot of students will just shut down. I saw that a lot during COVID, especially when students had masks on. It was like another layer that they could hide behind, right? And if they don't want to feel dumb, they don't want to feel, the stupid kid in the class or making that mistake, that's going to have them shut down. They're not going to want to try those problems. They're not going to be curious of what you're trying to teach them and to try things, because, they could be open to mistakes. So I think, my videos were one of those things, but also I think, how you implement your class and how you run that classroom for encouraging students to, try things. I mean, we did things on the board almost every single day. And I was always encouraging them, like, would they be doing like group work or something? I'm like, go up on the board,
Mm-hmm.
like it'll be your group work, but I'm like, I need to see mistakes. I will teach the mistakes. I'm not watching who's on, it's not a who did this, but I'm like,
Right.
I want you guys to feel comfortable and we can see those mistakes. We can talk about it. And it's a growing, opportunity. And so I think being able to be secure in your learning and not having that fear of mistakes is really important in the learning process.
What are some of your more popular videos that you think like, didn't think that was going to be popular, but kids or viewers just seem to grasp at it and love it?
I wouldn't say anything really sticks out as far as a particular topic. I'd say in general, like completing the square and factoring as a grouping of quadratics probably has a collection of like the most views. There's different videos that have popped off in the past and, and come down. But I wouldn't say there's any kind of outliers that was a immediate, kind of connection of like, hey, this resonated. And I have made some content that talks more in general about, math and learning, and overcoming struggles. I think those have always kind of like resonated, but I wouldn't say that is, unexpected.
Yeah. So how long ago did you leave the classroom?
I left in 2021.
What was the big deciding factor? So you were a teacher the whole time, right?
Yep, teacher the whole time. So I graduated from college in 2007, and my school actually was up in Michigan for the career fair. And so I could basically get a job in 2007 anywhere I wanted to. There was schools from almost every state in the country was at our job fair. I mean, everybody was in need of,
Right.
educators, especially math educators, except for Michigan. Michigan was not really doing much hiring in education. There was line
What
out. I
what
remember
year
there
was
was a
that?
line out
2008,
the
like
door.
right in the middle, like right when the economy was collapsing.
Yeah, it's right,
Okay.
it's right before. So everything's running on all cylinders,
Yeah,
right?
I gotcha. Okay.
But Michigan, they're literally people were out the door all applying into Michigan. And that was like my writing on the wall. I'm getting out of here. I'm going to, find a job somewhere. And it just kind of, Jacksonville was just one of those places that I was like, oh, I'll give it a shot. And, flew down and got some interviews, and then, started, 2 months later. And I would say it was really a perfect fit. I loved my time there, but it wasn't, there's a couple years where you kind of feel like, you get broken down, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, I don't know, that year really took a toll on me. And there was a couple years I was like, I don't know, maybe this might be it. But, every single time we'd always go back to Michigan in like July. And whenever I came back home in like July, you see the back to school supplies,
Yeah.
right? Everything's back to school, like all the retailers and everything.
And then where was your first teaching experience?
Jacksonville, Florida.
Florida. Okay.
That's where I'm based out of still here.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. Cool. Because so ironically, so my youngest daughter, godparents, my buddy Jordan, he's from Michigan, Marine City, New Baltimore.
Okay.
So, and I met him.
Okay.
He was a math teacher in DC when we met. But my first year teaching was in Jacksonville, North Carolina. So and then I moved to DC.
Okay.
That's where I met him. He left teaching too. I guess what was the big deciding factor for you to leave the classroom?
So to kind of continuity of, what I have is like when I came down, I would see that back to school.
Yeah.
And, August, the weather's kind of changing. And my whole life, every August was back to school. Like It was just ingrained. I mean, I was there as a student and then I immediately transitioned as a teacher. And every single year, no matter how bad the last year was, I always had those kind of feelings of like, I'm excited for this new school year, right? I can't wait for another school year to give it a go. And, when I had conversations, in 2020, where I had our third daughter, and I kind of knew that I was only going to step away if I didn't want to return. And it was that last year that we had her. I just remember I was like, I don't have the feeling of being excited, walking in the classroom. I mean, it was just after we kind of had COVID, everything's kind of
still
different, it's not the same. Your routine is all over. And I didn't want to just leave my kids. So I was like, I have to return to try to give some normalcy, to these kids that have gone through, because they have it a lot worse than I had. So I wanted to make sure I was there for at least that next year.
Right.
But it just, the whole year, I didn't want to wake up for work. I wasn't excited. And I just knew, I'm like, that's not fair to these students to, they're getting a version of the Mr. McLogan. It's not fair to them. I would not want my children to have a teacher that is not excited to be there and to teach. And so at that moment, I just knew, I'm like, this is it. I'm not 100% sure how I'm going to do things and what I'm going to do after this, but I'm like, I gotta step away from the classroom. And it was a difficult decision. I mean, it's tough to go into my daughter's school,
right?
Because and see this, talk to the teachers, because I just get all those feelings, back again. And it still makes me sad. I still miss a lot of it, but I'm also happy for what I had and happy for the new challenges I have as well.
Awesome. Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, we lost a lot of teachers left during COVID. I know that there was a lot of good teachers exodus. I see it almost every day on calls I do with parents, and schools scrambling to find high level teachers in AP programs. You have a lot of first year people being thrown into very rigorous classrooms. So I have a rapid fire round, Brian, if you're ready. It's just kind of
okay.
I break the rules. You can explain, but you don't have to. We could just go right in order. If it's a couple questions, if you're ready for that. Okay. Just first thing that comes to mind, basically. All right.
Okay.
All right. So rapid fire. Most overrated math advice.
Most overrated math device. What comes to my head? Do your homework later.
One thing students overthink.
I would say how they're going to be successful in class. And I'm sorry, I do have to elaborate on this.
Go ahead.
So many students, once they get a struggle, or they always ask me on my live streams on my channel, like, how do I do well in this class? How do I do well in that class? Like, they just overthink, like, because they get a new teacher or because they're in a new course, that everything they know about success is like thrown out the window. It's like the same things apply. Don't overthink it. Put in the work, ask questions, right? Just ask a lot of questions, put in the work, and get help when you need it. And it's really that simple as a recipe. Yes, your teacher and everything else is going to change, but put in the work and ask a lot of questions.
One thing students underthink.
Oh, I think this is a big one that I did as well. I think one thing students underthink, and I'm sorry, I'm going to have to explain this one too.
No, you're fine.
That math is linear. So many times, we kind of alluded to this in our conversation. Students will go through with these amazing grades, and then they would come to me in pre-calculus, and we always had this conversation. Mr. McLogan, I've had A's my whole life, or I have A's in all my classes, but I have a D for you. And we would look through it. And again, I was a very open book teacher. It wasn't like you have to know this or you get this grade and that's your grade. Like, we could see on their diagnostic test and multiple different variations of testing, the student lacked the necessary skills to, for their grade in my class. And again, that wasn't I'm not going to work with you or I'm not going to help you get better, but it was apparent through multiple different metrics that they did not have an A level of understanding to get ready for pre-calculus, to be in pre-calculus. And I'll say the same thing. I remember I started, once I started seeing success in college, right? I was doing good in pre-calculus and I was doing good and I started doing well in calculus. And then I remember I was like looking at all the upper level mathematics courses, and I'm like, I'm just starting to get confident and cocky, and like, oh, I kind of know how to learn math now. Like, I'm good. And then of course, some of those courses just knocked me off my high horse. And I really had to learn that, you still gotta put in the work and, do that. So math's not linear, even if you do great on one chapter, you still got to make sure you understand what you learned on that chapter and still put in the work on the next one.
Gotcha. Okay. Best way to recover after bombing a math test.
This one I'm really passionate about. You have to examine why and how you got those answers wrong. The worst thing you can do is throw that sheet of paper away. You have to be relentless to understand why and how you made those mistakes, so you can fix them and they don't happen again.
Okay. One sentence every struggling math student needs to hear.
I believe in you. Now go and put in the work.
Like that. Okay. It's a good way to end it. So, thank you, Brian, for coming on. I really, really do appreciate it. Where can students find your videos and courses?
So the best thing to getting connected with what the work that I do would just be going to YouTube at Brian McLogan.
Awesome. And if listeners remember one idea today, what should it be?
I think the one thing is always stay curious on asking the why. And I think whenever you are, getting stuck on things or wondering, what's the kind of the best thing forward, I think always kind of stepping back and understanding the why and the foundation and the reason behind things can really help you create a path forward.
I like that. Brian, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. We appreciate the conversation, and good luck. Good luck in the world of math. I'm sure it's really terrible weather down in Jacksonville right now in January, as my kids haven't had school for a week because it's too cold to go to school. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And appreciate it.
Appreciate it. All right. Till next time, everyone. Thanks for joining us on the Supported Learning Podcast. If today's conversation inspired you, challenged you, or sparked a new perspective, be sure to subscribe and share with a fellow changemaker. We'll be back soon with more voices, more insight, and more ways to elevate the future of learning together. Until then, keep learning and keep pushing the conversation forward.